This video we're going to show you how to plan an implant in Implant Studio. You'll start by grabbing a Trios laptop scanner and you can log in. The login information is on the top of the stand. And once you've logged in, go ahead and launch the 3shape Unite program. You're going to log in under Administrator and the PIN password is written on your keyboard. Go ahead and search for your patient's name. If their name doesn't show up, you can simply click on the Add Patient button there, and it'll add the patient's name to the system. Otherwise, if you do find it, you can click on their name, and then you're going to hit New Case. From here, you're going to select Implant Studio. So from here, click on Implant Planning. Click on the arch that you're going to be planning the implant on. Guide workflows should be tooth supported, and then select the implant that you'll be planning. Go ahead and hit Virtual Crown and then click that same tooth that needs replacement. If you're doing a bridge, don't forget to set the virtual crown on your Pontic tooth as well. Go ahead and hit Next. You can go ahead and proceed with your intraoral scans. You'll scan the upper, lower, and the bite scans. Once you finish the arch of interest, it's going to ask you to mark the tooth. So go ahead and click on the Edentulous spot and then hit Done. A few tips for scanning. You're going to want to turn off the color here, and this helps you visualize any missing data or any stitching errors if you have any. The other thing you want to do is to orient your scan so that you're looking down the path of insertion. And from here, you want to see that the surfaces of the teeth and tissue have been captured. Sometimes when you look at the embrasure spaces at the free gingival margin, you're not able to capture all that data because the edentulous span is a bit narrow and it's hard to capture those angles. As long as your scan surface, when viewed from the path of insertion, is captured cleanly, then your scan will be sufficient here. The other thing you want to do is to verify your occlusion is correct. So click on the Clearance tab and then hit Switch Views. You can change the intensity of the contacts here to verify that you have equal distribution of contacts in MIP. And of course, always confirm that that's the case in the patient's mouth. Sometimes they do have an open bite or some malocclusion that may look different. The other thing to do too is to trim up your scans. So you can use the trim feature here and trim away any cheek or lip or extra information that may interfere with your visualization of the scans. Once you finish the scans, you want to grab a faculty member to check and approve it. Once that has been completed, then you want to hit the post-process button. So once you post-process, you're not going to be able to go back and make any edits to the scans. So really ensure that everything is captured cleanly and that you have all the information that you need. Once you're done with that, then you're done with the patient portion of this visit. With the scanner, you can go ahead and get your CBCT scan in radiology. The software saves automatically, so don't worry about losing any information. You can go ahead and close out the laptop, and you'll pick up on the desktop computers going forward after your patient's dismissed. For this next phase of planning, you're going to jump on one of the desktop computers labeled 3D Lab. The login password is written on the monitor stand, and you can relaunch 3shape Unite. And then you can search for the patient's name that you've set up already and open up the case. Once you've opened up the case, you can see that the case is already set up with the previous settings that you did on the laptop. You can go ahead and click on the Scan Import window. From here, you want to click on Implant Patient CT Scan, go to the Z drive, 3shape, Implant Studio DICOMs. You're going to search for your patient's name, and then you're going to click on the first DICOM file to load the CBCT scan. Once it's loaded, go ahead and hit Select, and this should allow you to move along in the workflow. Go ahead and hit Next. The tooth's already missing, so you can hit Next on the tooth removal window. This is going to bring up the occlusal plane window here. And a few tips here: to rotate the scan, go ahead and hit the right mouse button. This allows you to rotate. If you want to zoom in and out, you can scroll with the wheel button. And then if you want to pan, go ahead and click on the wheel button on the mouse, and this allows you to move the scans around. So your goal here is to match up the occlusal plane to your teeth here. So you can also click on the icon here to close or to hide your other scans. So by clicking and dragging the occlusal plane window here, you can line up the teeth so that they're centered to your scan, and then you can also click and drag and rotate the circles to change the orientation here. So you want to make sure that it lines up with your scan as best as you can here. So that looks pretty good, and we can hit next to move on. So the next step here is doing our virtual wax up of the tooth that's missing. The AI is going to generate a proposal for us, and if you want to start to manipulate it, go ahead and hit the transform button here, and by clicking and grabbing the circles, you can rotate. The green circles will allow you to scale, and if you just simply click on the tooth itself, you can start to move the tooth around. One of the features here that you can choose to use is to copy a neighboring tooth to mimic the occlusal morphology here. So you can click on a tooth that you want to copy, and it's going to outline that tooth, and then it's going to change it to that same contour here. So if you're happy with the way that looks, you're going to have to click this apply button to confirm the design. And to further manipulate it, again, you can go to the transform button to start to line it up in the appropriate orientation. So one of the views I like is to sight down the arch here, and then you want to line up central groove and also look at the cusp tips, as those should line up to each other. So once you have the tooth in the approximate position, you're going to want to make sure that it's in the proper occlusal scheme. So you can turn on the antagonist. So a few shortcuts to notice here. You can hit A to turn on the antagonist, and then S to turn on and off the arch form in question. So that allows you to visualize things a little bit more quickly. In order to evaluate the occlusion, what you can do is hit this open cross-section button and then draw a straight line, and this allows you to see the upper and lower teeth in cross-section. So from here, this is a nice view because we want to achieve good cusp to fossa relationship here. So you can simply grab the tooth and then manipulate it using that 2D slice to help you land your functional cusp in the opposing grooves here. You can click the blue circle here, and then you can kind of scroll through the slices here to see if you need to make any more changes. So based on the setup, our occlusal morphology looks pretty good. If you want, you can do further manipulation and fine-tuning here by clicking some of these other yellow window circles. If you want, you can also click on the morph tool, and this allows you to move individual cusp tips here. So once you're satisfied with your wax up, we can go ahead and hit next to move on. Okay, this next step is just cropping out the CT scan. So you can hit accept, and then you can click and drag the corner circles here to start to decrease the volume of the CBCT. So we're planning an implant on tooth number 19, so we don't need any of this maxillary data. And also you can cut out some of the data posteriorly here. So you just want to make sure that you don't cut off any of the data that we're interested in. So you can click and drag the center arrows here, and you can kind of scroll through to make sure that we are not cut off here. So for example here, we got to raise that so we don't cut out that cusp tip. So you can just cycle through each of the windows, and this looks like we're in good shape here. So we can hit next to move on. And this next part is establishing our panoramic curve. So what you want to do is to move the curve to the arch of interest, and as you move, you'll see that the green line automatically updates to where the arch form is. And your reference should be the occlusal plane. So you want to click the red circle to rotate it. So the angle of the occlusal plane should mimic that of the occlusal plane. And then you want to lower that line so that you have a uniform thickness of the ridge width when you look at this axial view. So that's generally going to be a couple millimeters below the crested bone. The other view that you want to look at is from a frontal view, and you just want to level it out so it's also parallel to the occlusal plane. So if you're happy with the way that looks, you can also check this axial view and make smaller adjustments if needed by clicking and dragging these yellow circles. But that green line looks pretty centered in our ridge width there, so we're ready to move on. So this next part is aligning the cone beam data with our intraoral scan. Now the AI does a good job of automatically merging those two files together, and then what you'll see is this accuracy threshold. So anything that's in green signifies that the merging of the CBCT data in our intraoral scan is within 250 microns. So if you're mostly in the green category, then we know that we have good accuracy. If you want to look through and confirm, you can click on the manual alignment, and then you can scroll through the panel here, and you'll see that that tan outline represents our intraoral scan, and then you want to see that that overlays over the CBCT data accurately. So as we go through the slices, we can see that the tan line really mimics the teeth very well. For those patients that have a lot of metal, there tends to be a lot of scatter on the CBCT data, so that may not be as accurate. So you do want to find some teeth that are fairly unrestored and use those as your reference teeth to check to see if you need any adjustments. So if that looks good, go ahead and hit the confirm button, and this will allow you to move on. The next step is going to be marking our IA nerve. So the easiest way to do this is to click and drag on this panel view, and then you want to look on this orthogonal view until you see the opening of the mental foramen. So at this cross section, you can see the foramen, so you'll start clicking on the outside and then click the nerve. And what you can do is hit Control, hold that down, and then use your mouse to scroll. And as I scroll posteriorly, you can just simply click and then follow the canal space here. Another thing you can do is to jump over to this tangential view, and again you can click, or you can hold down Control and then scroll, and then this is going to move laterally. So you can see this tan line here, and then once you get to a view that you can see the majority of that canal space, you can simply click through. So we'll hit next and move on. Okay, so now we're ready to plan our implant here. So to add the implant, we can hit the green plus arrow, and then this is going to pull up our implant selection. So at the school here, we have two implant systems we use. One is the Straumann bone level tapered, the other is the Zimmer TSVT. So for a molar, we want to select a wider diameter implant. So the diameters are listed up on the columns here, and then the lengths are going to be on the rows. You can always go back and change the diameter and lengths later, but for now we'll select a 4/8 by 10 implant. So when you start planning the implant position, you want to start off by using this implant aligned feature. This allows you to rotate around the implant to look at the different views. So if you hold down the Control button and you hover over this window and you start scrolling with your wheel, you can see that the view changes and updates as you're rotating 360 around the implant. If that's unchecked, what that does is you can still move the cross section, but this is now following the panoramic curve that you had previously established. So let's start looking at our implant position with respect to our prosthetic parameters. And very simply, prosthetically for a posterior tooth, you want this screw channel to be centered mesial-distally and buccal-lingually in the tooth. For anterior teeth, your ideal prosthetic position is going to be with the screw channel through the cingulum. So by taking a look at this cross section here, we can start to move and manipulate the implant to achieve that goal. So in this case, we can click on the red circle and we can rotate it so it's more centered, and you can use that central groove there as your landmark. And then for the mesial distal position, I'm going to click and or hold control and rotate so that this view bisects the two neighboring teeth, and that helps me gonna get the best perspective for our mesial distal angulation. So from here, that looks fairly centered. We can move that slightly, and then now you can use the neighboring teeth and the roots to see that we're pretty parallel to the neighboring teeth here. So from that perspective, that looks good. And then you can look at these icons. You can always turn on and off these icons or make them transparent. So we'll bump this over just a hair. And yeah, so from a prosthetic point of view, that looks pretty satisfactory. The next thing that we got to think about is our surgical parameters. So a few key parameters that we got to analyze is that we got to have at least 1.5 millimeters from the implant to the neighboring teeth here. And what you'll notice is that there's a outline around the implant itself. So this is a buffer or safety zone that's established in the software. And if you want, you can always change the distance here, but there's a radial distance, which is from this portion of the implant to the outside line here, and an apical distance that you can change as well. That's from the bottom of the implant to that point right there. For now, we'll leave it at that 1.5 millimeter distance, since that's a good indication of implant to tooth parameters. And since we're in a molar, we have plenty of space between the teeth here. If you're planning implant to implant, you want 3 millimeters of space between the two implants. And from a buccal lingual perspective, you want at least 1 millimeter of buccal and lingual bone thickness. So you could always change the distance here to help you visualize whether you have enough bone. So based on those parameters, we're okay from adjacent teeth, and then from the IA canal, we have sufficient distance. If you wanted to measure specifically, you can hit the insert measurement button, and then you can click, and then this will give you the distance. So we can click on this button to delete. And then the last parameter to think about is the vertical position of the implant. Obviously, you want the implant completely embedded in bone, but you also want this implant platform to be a certain distance from their proposed free gingival margin. So when you look at this cross section here, you can see the outline of the tooth, and then you can see the outline of the soft tissue, which is this tan line. So where those intersect is your free gingival margin. And your depth of implant should be at least 3 millimeters apical to that position. So if we were to measure, we're at about 3.3 millimeters from that free gingival margin. So that allows for a more natural emergence profile as you're developing the contour of your implant crown. So if we're satisfied here, we can go ahead and hit next to move on to the surgical guide design. So the software does generate an AI proposal for your surgical guide, but I'll show you all the steps that it went through to get to this point. So the first thing that you got to establish is your path of insertion. So you want to look down the occlusal, and you kind of want to imagine how that surgical guide is going to seat. So you do want to look at the interproximal contacts and kind of have that evened out. So if you're happy with that, then click on this I button from view, and this will establish your path of insertion. And anywhere that has this tan or brown marker means that the software is going to virtually block that out. So the next part is really just establishing your outline of your surgical guide. So you're going to hit on this Add Patch button, and you're going to start to tell the software where you want your surgical guide to touch the teeth here. So you want to have a patch on each dentate segment here, and just like in the other windows, you can change the transparency level on the surgical guide. So this will establish one patch, and then we got to add another. So you'll start clicking on the tooth, and you kind of want to land right about at the height of contour here. Sometimes when you have these large diastemas, it does confuse the software if you come too high up. So there I stayed on the tissue a little bit. And depending on your situation, you don't always need to go to the other side of the arch completely. So I'm going to go to the contralateral canine. That should be plenty of teeth to stabilize the surgical guide. And now I'm going to wrap around the lingual. And you just start making some clicks until you complete the circle here. And then when you get to the end, you'll want to double click or click on the yellow circle to complete the surgical guide outline here. Okay, so one of the other things that you want to do too is to look at your guide sleeve here. This should be above the tissue if you can. So this allows you to try in and seat the surgical guide without having to flap it. So this will give you an indication of how high off of the tissue you are, and if it's highlighted in gold, then that means the software is telling you that you're touching something here. So that looks sufficient, and we want to minimize the footprint of this cylinder here, so you can click and drag that green circle so you minimize that there. You could also expand that circle to get a little bit more bulk for strength. So the next phase of designing this guide is going to be your bars and windows. You're going to want to look at your connector spaces and see if you're thin in any areas. If you are, then you're going to add a support bar, and you can simply click and click on the two areas, and then again you can use these circles to change the dimensions. So it's generally going to be at the interface here of your cylinder and the neighboring teeth that you're a little bit thin, so you can extend those out, and then you can change the different views to get it and manipulate it in the way that you want here. So the red circles can rotate depending on how you're viewing the guide here. Okay, so this should be sufficient for us for strength, and we can add one on the lingual if you're concerned about the thickness there. Okay, so that just adds a little thickness to the guide there. Let's do the windows here. So the next part is we want to add some viewing windows on our teeth so that we can make sure that the surgical guide is fully seated when we're doing the surgery. So you want to click on a neighboring tooth here, and this will cut out a little window here. You don't want it too close to the edge here, because this portion of the guide may be too thin, but at the same time you want to cut off enough of the window so that you can visualize the teeth and make it easy for you to see whether it's seated. Okay, so you want the window to cut out primarily the facial surface of it, because that's going to be the easiest to view. Okay, and then we want one on a posterior tooth here as well, so that we can verify that it's seated posteriorly. And then we'll put one on the contralateral side as well. Okay, so we can see the teeth there. We'll go to this side here. That looks good. And then we have the teeth that we can identify full seating as well. So the last part here is going to add our patient's name. So hit the plus button, and then you can click on an area to add their name. So this will complete out the surgical guide design. So once you're finished up with your surgical guide design, you're going to want to grab your faculty. You'll need a pros faculty and your surgeon to look at the implant placement, and then you'll also have Darcy look at the surgical guide design, and then you'll have our process assistant make sure that you have all the codes completed and the patient's paid for the surgical guide and all the paperwork is squared away. So once you've had those 4 signatures on our surgical guide approval form, then you'll be ready to schedule the patient for the implant surgery.